Block 1. Origins and the Germanic tribes. Ancient times, 1st century AD. Imagine a world without borders on maps. Without country names, without national flags, without capitals or governments. A world where people navigate by rivers, mountains, and stars. A world where forests seem endless and rivers appear eternal. This was northern and central Europe thousands of years ago, the land we now call Germany. It was a land of mist, dense dark woods, and cold winds. Trees grew so tightly together that sunlight barely reached the ground. Bears, wolves, deer, and wild boars roamed freely. Humans here were not masters of nature, they were a part of it. They did not conquer the land, they adapted to it. The earliest communities that settled these territories were hunters, fishermen, and gatherers. They did not build cities, stone palaces, or monumental temples. Their homes were simple, wooden huts covered with animal skins or straw. Yet despite the simplicity of their lifestyle, their inner world was rich and complex. Over time, these communities began to form a unique culture. They developed languages, traditions, and rituals. They sang songs around fires, told legends about gods and heroes, and passed knowledge from elders to the young. Slowly, the world of the Germanic tribes was born. The term Germanic did not originally describe a single people. It was a collective name later used by the Romans to refer to dozens of different tribes. Saxons, Franks, Goths, Vandals, Lombards, Cherusci. Each tribe had its own customs, its own dialect, its own leaders. Yet they shared common traits: a deep love of freedom, a strong warrior culture, and an unbreakable bond with nature. Germanic society had no centralized government. There were no kings in the modern sense. The highest authority was the assembly of free men, known as the Thing. Here, decisions about war and peace were made, disputes between families were settled, and leaders were chosen. It was an early form of democracy, shaped by tradition and honor rather than written law. Warriors held great respect in society. Bravery in battle determined social status. Young men sought to prove their courage, because valor granted them a voice among their people. Weapons were not merely tools of war, they were symbols of honor. A sword or spear was often passed down through generations as a sacred family heirloom. Yet life among the Germanic tribes was not only about warfare. Agriculture played a crucial role. They cultivated grains, raised livestock, and practiced various crafts. Blacksmiths forged knives, spearheads, and jewelry. Women wove fabrics, prepared food, and cared for children and households. Society functioned through cooperation. Every member had a role and purpose. Religion occupied a central place in their lives. The Germanic peoples believed in many gods. Thunder in the sky was a sign of divine power. The sun and moon represented cosmic order. Forests were sacred spaces filled with spiritual presence. There were no grand temples of stone. Nature itself was their temple. Sacred groves served as places of worship, sacrifice, and prayer. They believed deeply in fate. Life was seen as part of a vast cosmic design. Death was not considered an end, but a transition to another realm. A warrior who died in battle was honored, remembered in songs and stories. Memory was immortality. Gradually, these tribes began to encounter a powerful civilization to the south, the Roman Empire. Rome was the complete opposite of their world. Stone roads stretched for miles. Cities featured aqueducts and baths. Armies marched in disciplined formations. Laws were written and recorded. To the Germanic peoples, Rome was both a marvel and a looming threat. At first, contact was peaceful. Trade benefited both sides. The Germanic tribes supplied furs, amber, livestock, and slaves. The Romans offered wine, jewelry, weapons, and fine fabrics. Along with goods came ideas. Some tribal leaders even served in the Roman army, learning its tactics and military discipline. But as contact increased, so did tension. Rome sought expansion. The Germanic tribes sought independence. The forest became more than just a home, it became a shield. The wilderness was their fortress, their ally in the conflicts that would soon unfold. This era was a time of character formation, not of a state but of a mentality. Freedom was valued more than comfort. Honor outguadbe alt. The tribe stood above individual ambition. These values would echo through centuries and shape the cultural identity of the region. When we speak about the origins of Germany, we are not speaking of borders or capitals. We are speaking of people who lived in a world of myths and forests, of firelight and steel, of oral traditions and ancestral memory. It was here, in misty valleys and shadowed groves, that the earliest foundations of a future civilization were laid. At that time, no one called themselves German. There was no unified nation, no single language, no centralized rule. But these tribes created the cultural and social groundwork that would later evolve into a nation. Their dialects would develop into languages. Their beliefs would transform into legends. Their customs would become historical heritage. This was an age without written chronicles, yet full of living history. Stories were preserved in memory, in songs sung by storytellers, in symbols carved into jewelry, in burial mounds scattered across the land. It was an era that left behind few stone monuments, but it left something far more enduring: identity. From these beginnings emerged a long journey, from tribe to nation, from forest to city, from legend to documented history. And this journey was only just beginning. Block 2. Confrontation with the Roman Empire. 1st century AD, 3rd century AD. As the Germanic tribes were shaping their identity in forests and river valleys, a colossal power was expanding across Europe, the Roman Empire. Rome was not merely a state. It was an idea of order, law, engineering, and military dominance. Its legions marched across continents, building roads, cities, and fortifications wherever they went. To many peoples, Rome represented civilization itself. To others, it represented conquest. For the Germanic tribes living beyond the Rhine River, Rome was both fascinating and frightening. Roman merchants arrived first, bringing wine in clay amphorae, finely crafted metal tools, glassware, and coins stamped with the faces of emperors. These items seemed almost magical compared to local craftsmanship. Trade routes formed, and markets emerged near border settlements. Amber from the Baltic Sea, furs from the forests, and slaves captured in tribal conflicts were exchanged for Roman luxuries. But trade was only one side of the relationship. Behind merchants came diplomats. Behind diplomats came soldiers. The Roman Empire did not view borders as permanent limits. Expansion was part of its nature. The lands east of the Rhine were seen as both an opportunity and a challenge, territories rich in resources but inhabited by fiercely independent tribes who refused centralized control. Roman generals believed these lands could be subdued like Gaul or Britannia. They underestimated the environment and the people who lived within it. Roman legions were disciplined, organized, and technologically advanced. They built straight roads through wilderness, erected fortified camps overnight, and moved with mechanical precision. Their armor gleamed in formation, their shields locked together like a wall of iron. Against many enemies, this system was unstoppable. But Germania was different. The terrain itself resisted Rome. Dense forests limited visibility and mobility. Swamps swallowed supply wagons. Rivers flooded unpredictably. Narrow paths made large formations vulnerable. The Roman style of open-field battle was difficult to execute in such an environment. Meanwhile, the Germanic warriors knew every trail, every hill, every hidden passage. They moved silently, attacked swiftly, and vanished into the trees. Tensions escalated from cautious observation to open hostility. Small skirmishes along the frontier became more frequent. Roman outposts were attacked. Tribal villages were raided in retaliation. What had begun as cautious coexistence gradually turned into a struggle for dominance. The defining moment came in the year 9 AD, an event that would echo through centuries of European history: the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. At the center of this turning point stood a remarkable figure, Arminius. Born into the Cherusei tribe, he had been taken to Rome as a young hostage, a common political practice meant to secure loyalty. In Rome, he received military training, learned Latin, and eventually served as an officer in the Roman auxiliary forces. He understood Roman tactics, command structures, and weaknesses, yet his loyalty did not lie with the empire. Secretly, Arminius united several Germanic tribes that had often been rivals. He recognized that only unity could resist Roman expansion. Using his knowledge of Roman strategy, he orchestrated an ambush deep within the Teutoburg forest. Roman governor Publius Quinctilius Varus led 3 legions into the region, confident in Roman superiority and unaware of the trap ahead. The forest closed around them. Rain turned paths into mud. Wagons became stuck. Communication between units broke down. Then came the attack. Sudden, chaotic, relentless. Germanic warriors struck from the trees, from hillsides, from behind fallen logs. The Roman formations could not fully deploy. Armor became a burden rather than protection. Over several days of fighting, the legions were systematically destroyed. Nearly 20,000 Roman soldiers perished. 3 entire legions vanished from history. Their standards, sacred military symbols, were captured. It was not merely a defeat. It was a psychological shock to the empire. The aftermath was profound. Emperor Augustus, upon hearing the news, is said to have cried out in despair, demanding the return of his lost legions. Rome launched punitive expeditions in the following years, but the dream of turning Germania into a Roman province faded. The Rhine River solidified as a practical frontier, not just a geographic boundary, but a cultural and political divide. For the Germanic tribes, the victory became a legend of resistance and independence. Arminius transformed into a symbol of unity and defiance. Though the tribes would later continue to fight among themselves, the memory of defeating Rome strengthened a shared sense of identity. However, the story was not simply one of permanent separation. Interaction between Rome and the Germanic world continued for centuries. Trade persisted. Some tribes allied with Rome, serving as mercenaries in distant campaigns. Others migrated across imperial borders, settling within Roman territories. Cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Roman coins appeared in tribal settlements, while Germanic warriors entered Roman service. Over time, these interactions reshaped both worlds. The Roman Empire began to rely increasingly on Germanic soldiers to defend its borders. Germanic leaders learned Roman administrative methods. Hybrid cultures emerged along the frontier. The line between Roman and barbarian blurred, yet the psychological impact of Teutoburg remained. It marked the moment when Rome realized that its expansion had limits. Germania was not easily absorbed into the imperial system. Instead, it would develop along its own path, influenced by Rome but not controlled by it. This confrontation forged more than a military boundary. It shaped the cultural landscape of Europe. To the west of the Rhine, Roman law, Latin language, and urban life flourished. To the east, tribal autonomy, oral tradition, and decentralized power structures continued to dominate. 2 different civilizational trajectories emerged side by side. In the centuries that followed, the Germanic tribes would not remain isolated. Some would migrate into Roman lands, contributing to the transformations that eventually led to the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Others would establish kingdoms that blended Roman governance with tribal customs. The confrontation with Rome was not an end, it was a beginning. It was the moment when the forests proved stronger than the roads, when decentralized tribes defeated the most organized military machine of the ancient world, and when the future of Central Europe diverged from the Roman model. The echo of that clash would resonate through medieval kingdoms, national myths, and historical memory for generations. The struggle between Rome and the Germanic tribes was not simply a war of armies. It was a meeting of worlds, order and wilderness, empire and autonomy, stone and forest. And from that meeting emerged a new chapter in European history, one that would shape the identity of nations yet to be born. Block 3. The Middle Ages and the Holy Roman Empire. 5th century, 15th century. When the Western Roman Empire finally collapsed in the 5th century, Europe did not simply lose a government. It lost a system that had provided order, infrastructure, and a shared political framework for centuries. Roads fell into disrepair, cities declined, and long-distance trade weakened. Yet from this apparent chaos, new powers began to rise across the continent. Among them were the Germanic kingdoms that would shape the future of Central Europe. What followed was not an immediate birth of a single nation, but a long and complex transformation. The lands that would one day become Germany were not unified. They were a mosaic of duchies, tribes, bishoprics, and emerging cities. Authority was local, loyalties were personal, and borders shifted frequently. But within this fragmented world, new ideas of kingship, faith, and governance slowly took root. The rise of the Franks. One of the most influential early powers in this region was the Kingdom of the Franks. Originally a confederation of Germanic tribes, the Franks expanded westward into former Roman territories, gradually building a strong political structure. Their greatest ruler, Charlemagne, known as Charles the Great, would become one of the most significant figures in European history. Charlemagne was not only a conqueror but also a reformer. He sought to revive learning, standardize administration, and strengthen the Christian Church. Under his rule in the late 8th and early 9th centuries, an immense realm stretched across much of Western and Central Europe. Monasteries became centers of education, manuscripts were copied, and scholars gathered at his court. This cultural revival is often called the Carolingian Renaissance. In the year 800, Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in Rome. The ceremony symbolized the rebirth of imperial authority in Western Europe. It suggested continuity with ancient Rome, even though the political reality was very different. This coronation planted the seed of an idea that would later evolve into the Holy Roman Empire: fragmentation and feudal order. After Charlemagne's death, his empire gradually fragmented among heirs. Instead of a single centralized authority, the region developed into a feudal system. Land became the primary source of power. Kings granted territories to nobles in exchange for loyalty and military service. These nobles, in turn, relied on knights and local lords. Society became structured like a pyramid of obligations and allegiances. Life for ordinary people revolved around agriculture. Villages formed around castles or monasteries. Most individuals rarely traveled beyond a few miles from their birthplace. The rhythm of life was tied to seasons: planting, harvesting, winter survival. The church played a central role, not only spiritually but socially and economically. Festivals, marriages, and community gatherings were all deeply connected to religious traditions. At the same time, towns slowly began to reemerge. Markets appeared near trade routes and rivers. Craft guilds formed to regulate professions such as blacksmithing, weaving, and masonry. These towns would later become the engines of economic growth and cultural exchange. Birth of the Holy Roman Empire. In the 10th century, a new political entity began to take shape in Central Europe: the Holy Roman Empire. Despite its grand name, it was neither entirely holy, nor Roman in the ancient sense, nor a single unified empire. Instead, it was a loose confederation of territories ruled by princes, dukes, bishops, and free cities, all nominally under the authority of an emperor. The emperor was elected, not automatically hereditary. Powerful regional rulers chose him, which meant his authority depended heavily on negotiation and alliances. Unlike centralized monarchies such as France or England, the Holy Roman Empire functioned more like a complex network of semi-independent states. This structure had both strengths and weaknesses. On one hand, it allowed cultural diversity and local autonomy. On the other, it often led to political fragmentation and internal rivalries. Decisions required consensus, and unity was difficult to maintain. The struggle between crown and church. One of the defining conflicts of the medieval period was the struggle between secular rulers and the papacy. Known as the investiture controversy, this dispute centered on who had the authority to appoint bishops and church officials, the emperor or the pope. It was not merely a religious issue. It was a question of political power. The conflict revealed the delicate balance between spiritual and temporal authority. At times, emperors were excommunicated. At other times, popes were forced into compromise. These struggles shaped the political culture of Central Europe, reinforcing the idea that power was shared and contested rather than absolute. Cultural and economic growth. Despite political complexity, the Middle Ages were not a static or purely dark period. Universities were founded in cities such as Heidelberg and Cologne. Gothic cathedrals rose toward the sky, showcasing remarkable engineering and artistic skill. Trade networks expanded through organizations like the Hanseatic League, a commercial alliance of northern cities that connected markets across the Baltic and North Seas. Artisans refined their crafts, literature flourished in regional languages, and legal systems gradually developed. Castles and city walls reflected both the need for defense and the wealth of growing urban centers. Pilgrimages, fairs, and festivals created shared cultural experiences across regions. Diversity instead of unity. Unlike the formation of centralized kingdoms elsewhere in Europe, the German lands remained politically diverse. A traveler moving from one duchy to another might encounter different laws, coinage, dialects, and customs within a matter of days. Yet this diversity also fostered creativity and adaptability. No single authority controlled every aspect of life, allowing cities and regions to innovate independently. By the late Middle Ages, the territories of the Holy Roman Empire formed a vibrant but complex landscape, a patchwork of identities bound together by shared traditions, faith, and a loose imperial framework. It was not a nation in the modern sense, but it was a cultural sphere with growing cohesion. Legacy of the medieval era. The medieval centuries laid the structural foundations for the future. Systems of law, city governance, education, and trade all took shape during this time. The balance between local autonomy and broader political unity would remain a defining characteristic of German history for centuries to come. If the ancient era was about tribes and survival, and the Roman era about confrontation and borders, the medieval period was about structure, the slow construction of institutions, identities, and networks that would outlast kingdoms themselves. From scattered villages and fortified castles emerged a civilization increasingly connected by roads, ideas, and shared beliefs. This era did not create a single German state, but it created the framework from which one could eventually emerge. It was an age of transition, from fragmentation toward complexity, from oral tradition toward written law, from isolated settlements toward interconnected societies. And in that gradual transformation, the groundwork of a future nation was quietly being laid. Block 4. Religious transformation and great conflicts. 16th to 17th century. By the beginning of the 16th century, the lands of the Holy Roman Empire were vibrant but deeply divided. Cities were growing, trade routes were expanding, and universities were producing scholars, philosophers, and theologians. Yet beneath this progress lay tension, social inequality, corruption within religious institutions, and a growing desire for reform. Europe was on the edge of a transformation that would not only reshape faith, but also politics, culture, and identity. The world before the Reformation. Religion in medieval Central Europe was not simply a private matter, it defined daily life. The Catholic Church influenced education, law, morality, and governance. Monasteries were centers of knowledge, and clergy often held political power. For many people, the Church was the gateway to salvation and the authority that explained the meaning of life itself. However, dissatisfaction was growing. Some church officials were accused of excess wealth and moral hypocrisy. The selling of indulgences, payments believed to reduce punishment for sins, became especially controversial. Many ordinary believers and scholars felt that the spiritual mission of the Church had drifted away from its original teachings. Martin Luther and the spark of reform. In 1517, a German monk and theologian named Martin Luther took a step that would echo through centuries. According to tradition, he posted his 95 Theses on the door of a church in Wittenberg. These statements criticized certain church practices and called for theological debate. What began as an academic protest quickly grew into a widespread movement. Luther's ideas spread rapidly, aided by a relatively new technology, the printing press. Pamphlets, translations of the Bible into the German language, and public sermons allowed ordinary people to engage directly with religious texts for the first time. Literacy gained new importance, and language itself began to standardize as written German became more widely used. The Reformation was not only a religious shift, it was also a cultural awakening. It encouraged individual interpretation of Scripture, strengthened local identities, and reduced the absolute authority of distant institutions. Many princes within the Holy Roman Empire supported reform, seeing in it both spiritual conviction and political opportunity. Division and tension. The spread of Protestant ideas did not unify society, it divided it. Some regions embraced the new teachings, while others remained loyal to Catholic traditions. Families, cities, and entire territories found themselves split along religious lines. The empire became a mosaic not only of political jurisdictions, but also of faiths. Attempts were made to maintain balance. Agreements such as the Peace of Augsburg in 1555 introduced the principle that each ruler could determine the religion of his territory. While this reduced immediate conflict, it did not eliminate underlying tensions. Differences in belief continued to influence alliances, diplomacy, and internal politics. The 30 Years' War. These tensions eventually erupted into one of the most devastating conflicts in European history, the 30 Years' War, which lasted from 1618 to 1648. What began as a dispute within the Holy Roman Empire grew into a continental struggle involving many major powers. Armies marched across fields and towns, fortresses changed hands repeatedly, and civilian populations suffered enormously. The war was not only about religion, it was also about political influence and territorial control. Yet, for the people living through it, the distinction mattered little. Villages were destroyed, crops burned, and entire regions depopulated. Trade collapsed, famine spread, and disease followed in the wake of military campaigns. The social and economic scars lasted for generations. The Peace of Westphalia. In 1648, after decades of conflict, a series of treaties known collectively as the Peace of Westphalia brought the war to an end. These agreements marked a turning point in European diplomacy. They established principles of state sovereignty and non-interference that continue to influence international relations today. Territories gained greater autonomy, and the balance of power shifted toward regional rulers. For the German lands, the peace did not create unity, but it did create stability. It recognized the diversity of political and religious structures within the empire and reduced the likelihood of large-scale religious wars. The idea that multiple faiths and authorities could coexist within a broader political framework became more widely accepted. Cultural and intellectual effects. Despite the destruction of war, the period also produced lasting cultural changes. Education expanded as reading scripture became a personal responsibility in Protestant regions. Music, literature, and philosophy flourished in different forms across cities and courts. Printing houses multiplied, spreading not only religious works but also scientific and political ideas. The German language itself evolved significantly. Luther's Bible translation played a major role in shaping a common written form, bridging regional dialects. This linguistic development contributed to a shared cultural identity that extended beyond local borders. A new European landscape. By the late 17th century, Central Europe had been transformed. Religious authority was no longer centralized, political power was more distributed, and diplomacy had become a structured practice among states. The experience of prolonged conflict taught rulers the cost of division and the importance of negotiation. This era was both destructive and formative. It reshaped institutions, altered borders, and changed the relationship between faith and governance. It marked the transition from medieval structures toward early modern political systems. The memory of these upheavals would influence later generations, reminding them of the fragile balance between belief, power, and coexistence. The Reformation and the conflicts that followed were not simply chapters of religious history. They were catalysts that redefined how societies organized themselves, how knowledge spread, and how authority was questioned. From the debates of theologians to the treaties of diplomats, this period forged a new direction for the German lands and for Europe as a whole. Block 5. The road toward a unified state. 19th century. The unification of Germany. By the beginning of the 19th century, the German lands were still not a single country. Instead, they were a collection of kingdoms, duchies, principalities, and free cities, each with its own laws, rulers, currencies, and traditions. Although these territories shared language and cultural similarities, politically they remained divided. Yet beneath this fragmentation, a powerful idea was slowly growing: the idea of national unity. After the Napoleonic era, the early 1800s were shaped by the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon Bonaparte's campaigns redrew the political map of Europe and dissolved the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. For centuries, the empire had served as a loose framework for German territories. Its disappearance created both uncertainty and opportunity. In place of the old structure, the German Confederation was formed, a union of dozens of independent states intended to provide mutual defense without eliminating sovereignty. However, it was not a true nation. It lacked a centralized government and a shared political vision. Still, the experience of foreign occupation and resistance stirred a sense of collective identity among many people. Universities, writers, and philosophers began to promote the concept of a shared German culture. Poetry, music, and folklore celebrated common heritage. The notion of belonging to a broader national community slowly entered public consciousness, especially among students and intellectuals. Economic integration and industrial growth. While political unity remained distant, economic cooperation advanced more rapidly. One of the most important developments was the creation of the Zollverein, a customs union established in the 1830s. By removing trade barriers between many German states, it allowed goods to move more freely and stimulated industrial growth. Railways spread across the landscape, connecting cities and regions that had once been isolated. Factories emerged, producing steel, textiles, and machinery. Urban populations increased as people moved from rural villages to industrial centers in search of work. Economic modernization created new social classes: industrial workers, entrepreneurs, and an expanding middle class. This economic network did more than boost prosperity. It created practical interdependence. The more states traded and collaborated, the more natural the idea of political unity began to seem. The revolutions of 1848. Mid-century brought a wave of revolutions across Europe, and the German states were no exception. In 1848, citizens demanded constitutional governments, civil rights, and national unification. Assemblies were formed, debates filled public squares, and hopes for democratic reform surged. A national parliament convened in Frankfurt, attempting to draft a constitution for a unified Germany. It was a bold experiment in representative governance. Yet, internal disagreements and resistance from established monarchies weakened the movement. Ultimately, the revolution failed to achieve immediate unification. Nevertheless, it planted lasting ideas about citizenship, rights, and national identity. The rise of Prussia. Among the many German states, one began to stand out: Prussia. Known for its disciplined military, efficient administration, and growing industrial strength, Prussia became a leading force in shaping the future of German unity. Its leadership recognized that unification could not be achieved through idealism alone. It would require strategic diplomacy and, at times, military power. The central figure in this process was Otto von Bismarck, appointed Prime Minister of Prussia in 1862. Bismarck was a master of realpolitik, a pragmatic approach to politics focused on practical outcomes rather than ideology. He famously declared that the great questions of the time would be decided not by speeches and votes, but by iron and blood. Wars of unification. Under Bismarck's guidance, Prussia engaged in a series of carefully calculated conflicts that gradually brought the German states closer together. The Danish War, 1864, strengthened cooperation between German powers. The Austro-Prussian War, 1866, shifted leadership away from Austria and placed Prussia at the center of German affairs. The Franco-Prussian War, 1870 to 1871, united many German states against a common external opponent, igniting a powerful sense of shared purpose. These wars were not only military campaigns, they were political turning points. Victories increased Prussia's prestige and encouraged other states to align with it. National sentiment surged, and the idea of unity transformed from aspiration into reality. The proclamation of the German Empire. In January 1871, A historic ceremony took place in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles in France. There, leaders of the German states proclaimed the creation of the German Empire. The King of Prussia became the German Emperor, and a new nation officially entered the European stage. This moment symbolized the culmination of centuries of gradual cultural connection and decades of political maneuvering. For the first time, most German-speaking territories were united under a single national government. Flags, anthems, and shared institutions reinforced a collective identity. A new power in Europe, the newly unified Germany quickly became an industrial and scientific powerhouse. Railways expanded, universities flourished, and innovations in chemistry, engineering, and medicine gained international recognition. Cities such as Berlin, Munich, and Hamburg grew rapidly, reflecting economic confidence and modernization. Yet unity also brought new challenges, balancing regional diversity, managing rapid industrialization, and navigating complex international relationships. The empire's rise altered the balance of power in Europe, influencing alliances and rivalries that would shape the continent's future. Legacy of unification. The unification of Germany in the 19th century was not a simple merging of territories. It was the result of cultural evolution, economic cooperation, political negotiation, and military strategy. It demonstrated how shared language and heritage could eventually transform into a unified political structure, but also how that process required both vision and compromise. This era marked the transition from fragmented principalities to a modern nation-state. It laid the groundwork for the dramatic events of the 20th century, when Germany would again stand at the center of global transformations. The journey from scattered states to a single empire was long and complex, but it fundamentally reshaped the map and destiny of Europe. Block 6. World Wars and the Catastrophes of the 20th Century. 1914 to 1945. The 20th century began with promise for Germany as a newly unified and industrialized nation. Cities were growing, science and technology advanced, and the economy was thriving. Yet beneath the surface, deep social, political, and economic tensions were brewing. These tensions, combined with intense nationalism and complex international rivalries, would plunge Germany and the world into unprecedented conflict. World War I. In 1914, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand triggered a chain reaction that led to World War I. Germany, as part of the Central Powers, engaged in a war of unprecedented scale. Millions of soldiers marched to battlefields stretching from the forests of Europe to the trenches of Flanders. The war was brutal. Artillery, machine guns, and chemical weapons transformed traditional warfare into a deadly industrial machine. Cities and villages suffered alongside armies. By the time the fighting ended in 1918, Europe had been devastated. Germany faced defeat, widespread hunger, and political upheaval. The monarchy collapsed, and the Kaiser abdicated, leaving the country in the hands of a fragile new democracy, the Weimar Republic. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 imposed harsh penalties on Germany. Reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions fueled resentment and a sense of humiliation. Economic hardship, hyperinflation, and political extremism became daily realities for millions of Germans. The post-war period was unstable, setting the stage for radical movements. The rise of Nazism. In the 1920s and early 1930s, economic crises and national humiliation allowed extremist parties to gain influence. Among them, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, rose to prominence. Exploiting fear, resentment, and nationalist sentiment, Hitler promised to restore Germany's power, pride, and unity. In 1933, Hitler was appointed chancellor. The Nazi regime rapidly consolidated control, silencing opposition and establishing a totalitarian state. Propaganda, mass rallies, and ideological indoctrination transformed society. Civil liberties disappeared, and the state became an instrument of terror. World War II. Hitler's aggressive expansionist policies led to the outbreak of World War II in 1939. The war engulfed Europe and eventually much of the world. Germany's military initially achieved rapid victories, occupying neighboring countries and threatening global stability. However, the consequences were catastrophic. Cities were destroyed by bombing campaigns. Millions of soldiers and civilians were killed. The Holocaust, a systematic attempt to annihilate Jews, Romani people, and other groups, remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. It left scars that continue to shape German and global consciousness. By 1945, Germany lay in ruins. Its infrastructure was devastated, its cities burned, and millions were displaced or dead. The nation faced total defeat, moral reckoning, and occupation by foreign powers. The aftermath, the end of World War II, left Germany divided, both physically and ideologically. The devastation demanded reconstruction, reconciliation, and a rethinking of national identity. The horrors of war and the crimes of the Nazi regime created a responsibility to remember, educate, and prevent future atrocities. Germany's post-war journey would be defined by the challenge of rebuilding a society from the ashes while confronting the legacy of its past. This period illustrates the fragility of national ambition unchecked by ethics or diplomacy. It demonstrates how political extremism, economic instability, and unchecked militarism can lead to disasters on a global scale. The events of the 20th century would forever influence Germany's identity, shaping its commitment to democracy, human rights, and peace in the decades to come. Block 7. Division and the Cold War. 1945 to 1989. In 1945, Germany emerged from World War II defeated, shattered, and divided. The once powerful nation was now a land in ruins, both physically and morally. Cities lay in rubble, millions were displaced, and the economy had collapsed. Yet the consequences of defeat went beyond destruction. Germany would now become the central battleground of the emerging Cold War, split between two competing ideologies, democracy and socialism. The division of Germany. The Allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, divided Germany into 4 occupation zones. Berlin, the former capital, was also divided among the 4 powers. These arrangements were initially intended as temporary, but political tensions soon made them permanent. In 1949, 2 separate German states were officially established. The Federal Republic of Germany, FRG, in the West, aligned with the United States and Western Europe, adopting democratic institutions and a market economy. The German Democratic Republic, GDR, in the East, under Soviet influence, adopting a socialist system with centralized planning and state control. The division was not just political. It split families, communities, and cultural life. Streets, schools, and workplaces were suddenly on opposite sides of a global ideological conflict. For many Germans, the border was not just a line on a map. It was a barrier to family and freedom. Life in the 2 Germanys. Life in the West and East developed in radically different ways. West Germany experienced the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle. With American aid, investment, and a democratic government, the FRG rebuilt its industry, modernized infrastructure, and became one of Europe's most prosperous nations. Cities grew, new businesses thrived, and consumer goods became widely available. Political freedoms allowed free expression, debate, and cultural innovation. East Germany, in contrast, followed the socialist path of the Soviet Union. The GDR emphasized state control of industry, collectivized agriculture, and centralized education. While basic needs were often met, personal freedoms were limited. The state monitored citizens through the Stasi, the secret police, and dissent was harshly punished. Infrastructure development was uneven, and many East Germans felt isolated from the world beyond the Iron Curtain. The Berlin Wall. The stark contrast between East and West became painfully visible in 1961, when the GDR constructed the Berlin Wall. Overnight, streets and neighborhoods were severed. The wall became the symbol of division, oppression, and the global struggle between democracy and communism. For decades, families lived apart, and escape attempts were dangerous or fatal. Yet the wall also revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Stories of daring escapes, hidden tunnels, and acts of solidarity spread across both Germanys. Despite the separation, cultural, economic, and social connections persisted in subtle ways. Cold War tensions and daily life. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Germany was at the front line of global politics. NATO and the Warsaw Pact faced each other across the divided nation. Military exercises, espionage, and propaganda were constant. The threat of nuclear war loomed over daily life. Still, ordinary people found ways to live, work, and create culture under these pressures. West Germans enjoyed growing consumer culture, new music, cinema, and higher education opportunities. East Germans developed strong community networks, maintained traditions, and pursued art and science within the constraints of the socialist system. Seeds of change. By the late 1980s, pressures on the GDR were mounting. Economic stagnation, demands for freedom, and the broader collapse of socialist regimes in Eastern Europe set the stage for transformation. Citizens organized protests, demonstrations, and grassroots movements. The desire for reunification grew stronger each year, fueled by memories of a shared culture and history. In 1989, the long-standing divisions came to a dramatic conclusion. The Berlin Wall fell not by force of arms, but by popular demand. Crowds crossed freely, reuniting streets, families, and a nation. This moment was both symbolic and practical. Germany was now poised to embark on a new chapter in its long, turbulent history. Legacy of division. The Cold War left a lasting impact on Germany. Economically, socially, and culturally, decades of separation created differences that persisted even after reunification. Politically, Germany emerged as a strong advocate for democracy, European cooperation, and human rights. The lessons of division shaped its approach to governance, foreign policy, and collective memory. The period of division was a test of resilience, adaptation, and identity. It reminded Germans and the world that even under extreme constraints, societies endure, culture survives, and hope for unity can persist across walls, borders, and decades. Block 8. Reunification and Modern Germany. 1989. Present. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 was not just a dramatic political event. It was the culmination of centuries of German history, from scattered tribes to a nation divided by ideology. For the first time in 40 years, East and West Germany were reunited, opening the door to a new chapter of national identity, democracy, and global engagement. The peaceful revolution. The revolution in East Germany was largely peaceful. Citizens demanded political reform, free elections, and the removal of travel restrictions. Mass demonstrations swept cities like Leipzig and Berlin. People from all walks of life joined in, holding candles, singing songs, and calling for freedom. The government, unable to resist popular pressure, allowed the wall to fall on November 9, 1989. The scenes were historic. Families embraced across streets once divided, cars and bicycles streamed over checkpoints, and the sense of liberation was palpable. The fall of the wall became a global symbol of the end of the Cold War and the triumph of democracy over repression. Official reunification. In 1990, East and West Germany were formally united under a single democratic government, adopting the basic law of the Federal Republic. Reunification required more than political agreements. It demanded economic integration, social adaptation, and cultural reconciliation. The West provided financial support to modernize infrastructure in the East, invest in industry, and raise living standards. The process was complex, expensive, and sometimes controversial. Yet it laid the foundation for a modern, unified nation capable of participating fully in the global economy. Economic and cultural renaissance. Berlin, once divided, became the capital of the reunited Germany and a symbol of rebirth. The city transformed into a cultural, political, and creative hub. Museums, theaters, galleries, and music venues flourished. Festivals and events celebrated both German history and contemporary innovation. Across the country, reunification stimulated economic growth, technological advancement, and educational opportunities. Germany became a leader in engineering, automotive innovation, renewable energy, and digital technology. Cities like Munich, Hamburg, and Frankfurt became centers of commerce, culture, and finance. Germany in the European Union. Germany's role in Europe expanded dramatically after reunification. As the largest economy in the European Union, Germany became a driving force in economic policy, trade, and international diplomacy. It advocated for closer integration, stability, and cooperation among European nations. At the same time, Germany faced new challenges: managing migration, adapting to globalization, and responding to environmental crises. Initiatives like the Energiewende reflected the country's commitment to sustainability and the transition to renewable energy. Memory and responsibility. Modern German identity is deeply shaped by history. The nation places a strong emphasis on remembering the past, from the Holocaust to the experiences of division during the Cold War. Education, memorials, and public discourse reinforce the importance of human rights, democracy, and tolerance. This reflective approach allows Germany to confront past mistakes openly while building a society based on transparency, civic engagement, and ethical responsibility. It is a unique aspect of contemporary German culture, influencing policy, education, and social norms. Challenges and achievements. Germany today balances a proud historical legacy with the demands of a globalized world. It is an economic powerhouse, a center of innovation, and a leader in environmental policy. At the same time, it navigates complex social issues, from immigration and integration to digital transformation and energy policy. Culturally, Germany has become a global stage for art, music, literature, and film. Berlin, in particular, is recognized as one of the world's most dynamic cities, attracting artists, entrepreneurs, and innovators from around the globe. This vibrancy reflects both a celebration of freedom and a willingness to experiment and evolve. A nation reflecting on its past. The journey from fragmented tribes, through medieval kingdoms, religious conflicts, unification, devastation, division, and finally reunification, has created a German identity that is both resilient and reflective. Modern Germany is conscious of its history, committed to democratic values, and aware of its responsibilities in Europe and the world. The nation continues to redefine itself, politically, culturally, and socially, embracing diversity, technological progress, and environmental stewardship. The lessons of the past guide decisions in the present, ensuring that Germany's path forward is informed by experience, responsibility, and a commitment to human dignity. Conclusion. From the dense forests of ancient Germania to the bustling streets of modern Berlin, Germany's history is a story of transformation. It is the story of people who preserved their identity under foreign threat, who rebuilt society from ruins, who learned from the darkest chapters of their past, and who continue to shape a vibrant, modern democracy. The German experience demonstrates how resilience, reflection, and unity can guide a nation through centuries of change, conflict, and renewal. Today, Germany stands not only as a central power in Europe, but as a symbol of the enduring human capacity to learn, adapt, and thrive.